All right, and we're ready to go. This is Christopher Gould, everybody.
Well, I'm sure you know that by now. Sorry to be late for my own Recital Chapter, but anyone who does know me knows that I have to have tea at this time, and it has to be a very big cup. So.
Can I start, Norbert, by just saying a very big thank you for what was absolutely delightful performance. My only regret is that you couldn't actually hear us all clapping, even if we wanted to. I'm sure we did. Hold on, I'm just keeping half an eye on the waiting room. Admit, there we are. The numbers are growing steadily. But also to say, actually, as you yourself said, it's a very different experience, isn't it? And for us, I think seeing the intimacy of your domestic interior, Christopher, all those wonderful book-lined shelves plus the magnificent piano, of course, was rather special. I think everybody will agree. I'm going to perhaps shut up now, just some of you may not know who I am and what I'm doing here. I'm the person who had the idea, actually about 3 years ago now, amazingly, for initiating the Insiders Outsiders Festival, and it's exceeded my wildest expectations, the level of interest, goodwill, fascinating new material that has come up to the surface. And Norbert from the very beginning was one of my most loyal and important allies in the music field, which is not my field. I'm a visual arts person. So I think without further ado, I will hand over to Norbert and Christopher and yourselves. It's a fairly small and select group who've actually decided to listen in this afternoon. It will be, you must tell everybody, the recording and indeed the Q&A, this discussion will be available on YouTube hereafter for the foreseeable future. So tell your friends. But over to you, Norbert and Chris.
Well, I mean, we're just here to share our cup of tea, really, and what you would normally do after the concert when you're meeting people in the around the venue, really. So I mean, I suppose we could just open it up for questions and comments, please. I mean, so we're here to answer any questions you may have.
Can I just interject a practicality? You probably all know the ropes by now, but I see some of you have indeed made yourselves invisible. I think given the smallish numbers, please do switch on the video if you would like to be seen. And also, of course, most importantly, if you want to talk, then perhaps raise a hand or unmute yourself, and we mustn't make it too much of a free-for-all. I'm sure it'll have its own momentum, but you need to unmute yourselves to be heard, of course. Here we have, in fact, a question typed in. Shall I read it out, Norbert? From Vivian Trenner. Is any of the material published? And if so, by whom and whether in lower keys?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Kirschblütenlieder, they were published originally. I mean, actually, both Kahn's and Wellesz's music was always published with major publishers. And I wouldn't think that that any of them are. I mean, that any of them are available of the Wellesz songs in a lower key. I haven't found that, but certainly, I mean, it's a good question actually. I mean, I should be able to tell you the publisher. Just a moment. Do you want to say something about that, Chris?
Not particularly. I mean, I think that we know that there are various people involved, and particularly in reviving Wellesz's music, and as the songs, some of them are going to have a republication, and I know that Sibelius has been used, which is the program that you use the modern program that you use to type in a musical score, and that has a wonderful button which allows you to transpose things. So it may be that in the future that they will consider publishing lower keys. However, I do want to say, not to put you off, I think you have to be very careful when you're transposing songs written by a composer such as Wellesz, where the piano parts are incredibly beautifully fashioned, not to destroy the composer's wishes too much by doing them too lower or too high, because often they don't actually play very well in lower and high keys. I almost never say that to anyone, and I've never heard anyone say that, but it is actually a bit of an issue, especially with songs like these, which rely on very much a certain kind of pianistic colour. But hopefully they will be published in different keys.
Well, I mean, the Wellesz songs were originally published by Simrock, and Simrock was also Brahms's publisher. And so I don't know if that is still available, because I think that Simrock is still being taken over. But to anybody who would like to perform them, I would recommend getting in touch with the Egon Wellesz Foundation in Vienna, they have a website, and they will make sheet music available to anyone, really, as long as it's legally possible. And I think with these ones, it definitely is. With the Robert Kahn songs, it's a slightly different situation. Kahn had several publishers, also all reputable publishers at the time, but hardly any of his music was republished after the war, and so almost all of it is out of print. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not possible to get the sheet music, and in fact, from next year, it will be completely free, and you will probably be able to find it online on ISMLP or other online providers, because it will be, out of copyright. It's just still within copyright, and some publishers are able to offer reprints. So we've been able to get that from a publisher, Toni Berg, in southern Germany. But it depends really on the songs. There are, actually quite a few of those are already available on ISMLP at the moment. Yes?
Yes, I have. First of all, I'm here because of my friend Christopher Harvey. Hello, Christopher. It's so lovely to see you. Thank you. So it was a wonderful concert, and I'm a former singer myself. I had never known of these composers, so this is quite an experience for me. And a couple of questions did arise in my head. For Wellesz, when did he compose those 5 songs? Because in a little bit of a research that I did when he immigrated to England, I understand that he was interned as an alien enemy at the time that he was there. So that would be my first question. When did he compose these 5 beautiful, delicate, but very sensuous songs? And the other question I had was about Robert Kahn. I also find very interesting his nephew, Roger Kahn, was a well-known 1920s jazz composer and performer here in the United States. But as far as Robert is concerned, I think that his music was very much on par with Schubert, Schumann, and Brahms. Were his pieces popular as they were? Or was it just because Fischer-Dieskau and Hermann Prey had made Schubert and Brahms and Schumann so famous that somehow Robert Kahn kind of got pushed in the shadows? I know as a young singer, I was never exposed to Robert Kahn in the world of Lieder.
Well, I'm passing over to Norbert because this really is more, I've been very lucky to have been taking part in many of Norbert's projects in this field, but he really is the expert, so I'm just going to look at Norbert and he can answer. I might chip in.
Well, the first question about Wellesz, the Kirschblütenlieder were written in 1912, so that's relatively early, but Wellesz born 1885, so he would have been in his late 20s. Yes, late 20s, and well, they are very much, they show his real true style and all his colors and this wonderful sumptuous. For me, it sounds a lot like French music. In fact, the cycle is dedicated to a French musicologist, and Wellesz was in touch with international musicological societies through his role as an assistant to Bruno Adler. And he was quite an internationalist, sort of very well-connected person. And he could take advantage of those connections when he had to get out of Austria in the late 30s because of the Nazis taking over. And he was able to find support in Oxford University, where he had already established a foothold as an expert on Byzantine music, actually. And then the internment is a very unfortunate episode in the life of all these émigrés. And if you follow the other events that Monica has put on, and some of which I was involved with as well, about music and internment, there is a lot of history there that's important to remember. And it is a very complex story. People who had been in concentration camps in Germany and Austria had actually were then interned, and actually made quite clear that it was quite different from a Nazi concentration camp, of course, but it still was, especially for older people who were, very settled in their ways. It was a huge challenge to deal with that. But Wellesz, I think, probably got out quite quickly. There was a committee in Britain headed by very reputable musicians like Ralph Vaughan Williams that campaigned for musicians to be released from internment. But we know that Wellesz gave talks in internment about various subjects. So the people who were interned with him were the beneficiaries of that. And of course, then he was able to live a comfortable life in Oxford and have a very stimulating environment there. And of course, influence a lot of musicians and musicologists in Britain. But of course, there's still that question of what would have happened had he not been thrown out of Austria. And about Robert Kahn, I absolutely adore Robert Kahn's music, and I felt when I first encountered it, I felt like you, really totally surprised that I had never heard of this music. And I've been wondering a great deal, why that may be. And I mean, you mentioned the great tradition of Brahms and Schubert and Schumann, and I think you're absolutely right. He's very much part of that. But of course, he lived later. He was a contemporary of Richard Strauss or Max Reger, for example, who died much earlier, of course. But so these were the composers that were at his time, equally writing songs and taking on this tradition. And I find his music is really, for me, it represents really the important role of educated Jewish musicians in German culture, because he was one. Brahms was very close to that circle of Jewish musicians, but that included Joseph Joachim, but also some others who kind of were held in very high regard. Although of course there was tremendous anti-Semitism, and it's difficult to separate the story of this music from the history of anti-Semitism. And ultimately, when it came to the 1930s, by which time Kahn had lived a full life as a composer, published and performed all over the place, with the one exception that he never wrote any symphonies or any operas. And this is actually one of the aspects that we have to remember. Richard Strauss is mostly known for his big operas, whereas with Kahn, there wasn't anything like that that could be revived after the war and would have that public visibility that Strauss's operas had, for example. And the other aspect is that ultimately, it's so German, this music. I mean, it is, Gerhard Hauptmann is the Germanic titan of the time. And the fact that a Jewish composer set his music and was a close personal friend, of course, became it was a matter of, well, I mean, first of all, when anti-Semitism was rife and dominating the scene in Germany, it became impossible to support Kahn. And actually, it's very interesting how Hauptmann, did or really did not really do very much to help his friend, but he arguably couldn't have done very much. Others, like Wilhelm Kempf, the pianist, who was a composition pupil of Kahn, he did a great deal to try to help his teacher, but also couldn't achieve very much, and Kahn was thrown out of the Akademie der Künste. But then, after the war, well, it's, that the musical development in Germany after the war really meant there was a radical break, and the Darmstadt school, which had very obviously very atonal composers as at its core, was really supported. I mean, we know that was supported by the Allies, and there was a reluctance to return to what had been before. And Kahn, being Jewish, and even after the war, at least there would have been embarrassment about the way he was treated. So again, it was difficult to promote his music, and we know it was played by some people, and it was also played here in Britain. I mean, I found scores of Kahn on the Royal College of Music library shelves that have been there more than 100 years. So, he was known in Britain as well, but he never made the mainstream. And I would say he certainly is on a par with his leader, with those of Strauss or with Max Reger, for example. And I think Hans Pfitzner is another composer from that time, who is quite well known among singers. And I think Dutch Kahn does deserve a much higher place in those rankings, so to speak. But also, it's just my personal thing. I just love these songs. They really go very much to the core of what I feel I would like to do as a musician, what I would like to sing.
Thank you.
Stille Leitung.
Yes, Stille Leitung. So there are a few comments in the chat here, but it's fine. I mean, I think it's really, this was not meant to be a particularly academic exercise today. We just wanted to share this music with you, and we're very, very grateful that you joined us. And you can always reach us. You can still put comments in the chat of the video, but you can also reach us through our websites. And we'd love to stay in touch with you. If you have any questions, we'll be here, and hopefully we'll have another recital soon.
Yeah.
No, but I'm not going to let you go quite so easily. I have a few
sure.
things that I'd like you to elaborate on. I mean, one is, of course, the very basic question, why are these figures like Robert Kahn, why are they not better known in this country? And this question of where do these composers fit and not fit? Maybe you'd like to say something about that.
You sort of answered that one.
What
you just said, surely.
Yeah.
The idea of, I think that also because Kahn especially, I mean, I'm not a musicologist, but I feel that his music is so retrospective. It's more conservative musically than Schumann. It's absolutely exquisite. To me, it sounds like extraordinarily good Brahms, and that's a very huge compliment because I'm a huge Brahms fan. If perhaps he had been writing in a more modernist style, he might have been lost because most of the general public don't necessarily want to hear atonal music or music that's, But I don't know. I think he fell between the cracks completely unjustly, and for all the reasons that you were talking about. It's not fair, and I think there are many people, many artists who do this.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess that was my thrust of my question, Chris, that actually it's not just Kahn, there are many others, and Norbert is the best person again to address this issue. It is a broader question, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think with Kahn, he really remained true to himself. I mean, another person that comes to mind is Hans Gahl, who was also from this sort of Brahms environment in Vienna and studied and worked with Eusebius Mandaszewski on the first Brahms edition, and then was very strongly influenced by this music. And it doesn't mean that he writes like Brahms, or Gahl really developed his own style, but he somehow resisted getting sort of pulled into the craze of huge experimentation, atonal music, and that wasn't him. And also that was to his detriment, especially in the 50s and 60s, when there was really an expectation for music to sound, classical music to sound really weird. And there have been so many parodies of that. I mean, if you think of the Gerhard Hoffnung concerts and this sort of modernist composer, or something, I don't know, they made a complete joke of this. I mean, and it has to sound absolutely, anyway, I mean, and that doesn't mean that not all of this development was, I mean, that this development wasn't great and fascinating and pulled people in, but there was a huge rapture. Is that right? A rapture in the continuity of really the relationship between audiences and classical composers, and there was almost an emotional inability, I think, to go back to certainly in Germany, to this sort of pre-First World War to the Germanic world, I think, and that's for Kahn, that was difficult, for Gahl also, but that actually is changing. I mean, if you look at the revival of Hans Gahl's music in the last 15-20 years, almost all of his works have been recorded, and they are actually being performed, and the operas have been done in Germany now. It's really quite remarkable how people suddenly take to this music. And I think something similar is happening with Kahn. There have been many CDs of chamber music released, several in the last few years. And of course, our Ensemble Émigré CD, which is a sort of portrait of him with a mixture of previously unrecorded chamber music, like this wonderful quintet, Opus 52, which has a horn and a clarinet in the middle parts and almost has an orchestral texture. It's amazing. Only somebody like Kahn, who was a master of the small form and never tried the big form, would have written something like this. And then, of course, the songs we have recorded, and there were also excerpts from this wonderful Tagebuch in Tönen, this diary in piano music, with 1,160 pieces which Kahn wrote, most of them in Britain. And they're only available in manuscript still, and we are gradually getting to know it, and it's a fascinating thing as well. So I think there's a lot more to come for those composers, and that is ultimately satisfying to know that their time is coming again. And it's certainly not lost, this music, because everybody who encounters it and plays it recognizes its superior quality. And I think that's not something that anybody wants to lose or forget. Just got to get people to know about it, and that's why we're doing this sort of thing.
And that brings me, Norbert, to my next and possibly the last question. As some of you will already know, Norbert set up the wonderful website under the auspices of the Royal College of Music called, rather poetically, Singing a Song in a Foreign Land, which has sort of morphed or rather evolved and progressed into a bigger and enviably well-funded project, also under the aegis of the Royal College, called Music, Migration and Mobility. And I wonder if you could just give us some hints. I know everything's on hold at the moment because of the virus business, but what are your plans for the future? Are there things you can tell us about that are in the offing?
Well, yeah, thank you. The Royal College actually has been very supportive of the research exploration of the legacy of the musicians who came from Germany and Austria during and shortly after the Second World War, also before. So the initial project we had in 2012 to 2014 explored this music, and then we were able to put on a symposium, Singing a Song in a Foreign Land, where we met so many families of and friends of those émigrés, most of whom, of course, have died, but a few are still around, which is wonderful, and they are really cherished colleagues, and it's wonderful to be able to talk to them still. I'm talking, for example, about Joseph Horowitz, the composer, or Anita Lasker-Balfisch, the cellist, who just celebrated her 95th birthday. But that legacy was very, very important for classical music in Britain, mostly because people were so influential, these émigrés were so influential as teachers and also as performers, as broadcasters, and it sort of internationalized classical music. And that's not me saying that, but it's, for example, Janet Baker, the mezzo-soprano, said that in an interview. And after that symposium, we were able to do a series of oral history interviews, which you can all find on the Royal College of Music website, under this Singing a Song in a Foreign Land heading. And there are hours and hours of footage of people talking about this period in musical history, especially after the war. And so there are people like Alexander Goer, who was also a composer, whose father, Walter Goer, was a conductor and very influential in Britain. There's an interview with Andrea Rauter, the daughter of Ferdinand Rauter, the pianist, who co-founded the Anglo-Austrian Music Society. Anyway, so these interviews were a next step in our journey. And then in 2016, we had a big project about Peter Gelhorn, who was a conductor and coach pianist. Chris Gould knew him very well. And Chris...
well, he was one of the... Actually, when I was 18, I attended a course in Oxford in a summer school. My German teacher was a fabulous amateur tenor, very gifted, still is. We both went to this summer school in Oxford, and there was Paul Hamburger and Peter Gelhorn teaching there. I never forget Peter's inspiring teaching. And on that course, I went, oh, I want to be a song accompanist. It was transformative for me. So yeah, these people have such profound effects on our lives. So we certainly have cherished what, as you say, it's a good word, and grown through them. So yeah.
So that there you have it.
I am doing this now because of, well, because of many influences, but that was one very special moment, being introduced to this wonderful repertoire and seeing how the intimacy of it and the beauty of the language, really, really very special.
And so with Peter Gelhorn, we were able to publish a lot of his chamber music, which we had found in the British Library collections in manuscript form. But after that, we developed a larger project that is now ongoing. I mean, suspended at the moment, as you mentioned, but it started in September last year. And we have a whole team of, well, we have a musicologist colleague, Dr. Beth Snyder, working on archival sources in, for example, the Anglo-Austrian Music Society and Gelhorn are the two big case studies that we're developing about, how British institutions were, influenced by those émigrés. And then we're building a big online resource where we hope to make information about those composers and also performers and teachers and publishers available, in a wider way to the British public or to people anywhere, really. And we are building story maps, and that's the exciting thing for us. It's an interdisciplinary project where we're working with a professor as well, Holloway, a human geographer, Professor Peter Adey, and we're going to have another research associate there, building maps of those people's movements. And it's actually the mobility of musicians that makes it possible that these strong influences are passed on, and that this kind of transnational interaction, that internationalization is possible. So mobility studies is really the sort of humanities discipline that we found fits this story. And that's how we're trying to look at the bigger picture here and see that we can learn something about the impact of migration on culture, which is, I think, very much, what the Insiders Outsiders Festival is about as well.
No, but I see there's a very specific question going back to Robert Kahn from Jona Japu Kromholz. Are we sure that Kahn never tried, you can see it, tried the larger forms, or simply that he was dissatisfied and never completed anything of that type?
Well, I think that he was a repetiteur in the Leipzig Opera House as a young man. And I think he just, what I understand, I mean, there is actually only one proper book about Kahn, and it's not very widely available. It's a dissertation by the German musicologist Stefan Fahl, who is a wonderful researcher, but there isn't not that much around about him. But I understand that Kahn was quite dissatisfied, or didn't really like the world of opera that he sort of worked in there. And I can understand that. I sang as an opera singer for a few years, and I don't miss it terribly. I mean, it still is a wonderful art form, but the lifestyle that's connected to it is also a challenge. So it didn't sort of fit him that well. He did orchestrate some of his songs, and he also wrote some choral compositions that included orchestras. But so, I mean, I think I would urge you to have a look on the website that Stefan Fahl, who I've just mentioned, has actually built, called robert-kahn.de, robertkahn.de, and you can find a whole list of works, and there are a few orchestral works there. So it's not an absolutely exclusive thing, but I think the main thrust of his compositional output was in the area of lieder and chamber music and choral music.
So are there any more questions or comments before we draw things to a close? Last chance. All right, well, I'm sure this is a conversation to be continued in many different forums. May I just end again by thanking both of you so very much for a wonderful performance experience. Many, many thanks. And also just to reiterate what Norbert has mentioned, that there have been a number of online events, both during Refugee Week in mid-June and last week, as part of this program of online events related to the Insiders Outsiders theme, but focusing specifically on internment, and even more specifically on music and internment. So if you go to the insidersoutsiders.festival.org and look at the news section at the very top, you will get information of everything, and everything's been recorded, so the things that have happened already are available now on YouTube. And also, just last but certainly not least, to mention that actually one of the last events taking place as part of this series of events is on Thursday, Sunday at 6 o'clock, the 30th of July. And it's going to be, I think, a heartbreaking event in many ways, but also very fascinating, dedicated to Arnold and Alma Rosé. Those of you in the music world, I'm sure, will know something about them. And you mentioned, Norbert, the extraordinary Anita Laska-Wallfisch, and she, rather unusually, I have to say, and much to my delight, has agreed to be in conversation with her grandson, who Norbert has also worked with, baritone and cellist Simon Wallfisch, talking about her experience of being in the women's orchestra at Auschwitz under the tutelage, if that's the right word, of Alma Rosé. Arnold came to this country. Alma met a very different fate. So do sign up to that if you're interested. So I think enough for one day. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for coming, everybody. All the best.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Nothing.